Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday session. Today is February 3rd. My goodness, where's all the time gone? And this is our final in fall. We've had 4 weeks of going into the processes in the PMBOK guide on Wednesdays as a summary for what you should have been studying on the learning management system. So let's jump straight into it. As usual, we are going into the world of project management. The world of project management could be predictive, it could be hybrid, it could be agile, it could be more incremental than anything else, it could be more iterative than anything else. So it's important to look at the world of project management as a fluid and dynamic array of possibilities. On your exam, it is important that you can switch from knowledge area to knowledge area, from concept in agile to concept in predictive, to a melding of those flavors. So today we're talking about stakeholder management, and stakeholder management cuts across both agile and predictive. In stakeholder management in the PMBOK guide, we identify the individuals and entities who may be affected by the project or who could be affected by the project. We plan how to engage our stakeholders, and then we engage our stakeholders by communicating and working with them. And then we monitor our stakeholder engagement effectiveness. So in essence, there are 4 processes. The first is identify stakeholders. The identify stakeholders has 1 output. I want you to type it into the chat and let me know that you know what that output is. What is the output of identify stakeholders? 1 key output. Anybody know? Type it in. Oh, I see some chats coming in. Thank you very much. Let's see what we have in the chat. Awesome. Stakeholder register. That is exactly it. The stakeholder register is an output of identify stakeholders. Now, there is a little bit of a journey to get into your stakeholder register. It doesn't get created as quickly as that because it's not just a list. It's a list and then more. So in this process, we're identifying project stakeholders regularly. We're analyzing and documenting relevant information. That's what takes time, analyzing and documenting their information regarding their interests, regarding their involvement, regarding dependencies, regarding influence and potential impact on project success. So it's a very, very important process. And I want us to just take a look real quick at some of the things we do in identify stakeholders. In identify stakeholders, we want to identify our stakeholders early. We want to constantly analyze. So this is not a one-time thing. This happens throughout the project, right? We identify them early. We constantly analyze because stakeholders could change, their interests could change, they could leave the project. And we want to focus on the right stakeholders at the right time, the right frequency, the right magnitude of engagement. And then we should update our stakeholder register. Now, before we get to the stakeholder register, we have certain things we talk about, especially on your exam. You want to know this for your exam. For your exam, you need to know the power interest grid, and there are various names you could call this thing. So why don't you follow me to the PMBOK guide, your favorite book. Let's go to chapter 13, and let's read some of the, I call them allotropes, other names for this thing called the stakeholder power interest grid. This is 13.1, and it's on page 512 in your PMBOK guide. It says, power interest grid, power influence grid, impact influence grid. Now, it's important for your exam to know what they mean by power, what they mean by interest, what they mean by influence. They often scramble these words around in questions, and you need to know what each means. So let's read. Each of these techniques supports a grouping of stakeholders according to their level of authority, power, level of concern about the project's outcome, interest, ability to influence the outcomes of the project, influence, or ability to cause changes to the project's planning or execution. These classification models are useful for small projects or for projects with simple relationships between stakeholders and a project, or within the stakeholder community itself. So this is a very simple model. It is used even in the agile space, as Roy told you. Now, if you take a look at the grid, you can plot stakeholders that have a high level of power or interest, or influence and interest, or influence and impact, whatever it is. But the bottom line is, typically on your exam, you see them using the power interest grid as a basis for asking questions. What do you do with a stakeholder in the green section? What do you do with a stakeholder in the top yellow section? Top left? What do you do with a stakeholder in the top right? So let's start off with the green. I want you to chat into me. What is the strategy for a stakeholder in the bottom left corner? Just chat into me. Let me make sure that you did study this and you're following the logic. Awesome. Thank you very much, LTC Maddox. Fantastic. So that is monitor. You want to monitor stakeholders that have a low level of power, low level of interest. Why? Because if they move and suddenly become very influential, very powerful, very interested, you want to be aware of that. All right, let's talk about our next one. What do you do with the top left? Can you chat into me? What do you do with the top left? Very good, Scott. That is indeed very correct. You could use some of this information and feed that into other documents. What do you do with the top left? Top left, yellow. What do you do with stakeholders that have a high level of power, low level of interest? Very good. Thank you. That is very correct. Thank you, Tamika and May. That is correct. You want to keep satisfied. What do you do with stakeholders in the red, the danger zone? What should you do with those? Now, this is not in the PMBOK guide. And that's why in the videos we cover it. In our book, it's in there. This used to be in the old PMBOK guide, the 5th edition. In the 6th edition, for some reason, they took it out, but you can still get it on the exam. Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Tamika. Thank you, Scott. Very good. So you want to keep them satisfied. Be like white on rice. That's what I say. Be like white on rice. Check in with them. Just understand how they operate and make sure nothing slips through the cracks. Last but not least, at the bottom right, we have keep informed. Those folks, we want to make sure that they are informed about what is going on, because folks like that are very interested, and you need to keep their interest to the level that it is. A stakeholder that is very interested but has a low level of power may not be able to do much, but they could be your cheerleader. Now, when you go a step further in the PMBOK guide, let's go to the next page on page 513. It says stakeholder cube. This is a refinement of the grid models previously mentioned. The model combines the grid elements into a 3-dimensional model. So just imagine the power interest grid, making it a 3-dimensional model. So instead of power and interest alone, imagine power, interest, and attitude coming out at you from the image. The more the attitude comes out towards you, the more positive the attitude. The more the attitude is away from you, negative. So let's take a look at this. Again, you don't have this image in the PMBOK guide, but this is how it is. So imagine taking your power interest grid and putting it into 3 dimensions, just like that. So you have a cube of sorts, and attitude, as you can see, is coming out at you. So you have power, interest, and attitude. As you can see on the screen, the negative means a bad attitude, a poor attitude, a negative attitude towards the project. That negative zone is really the 0 point. So you could say a stakeholder has low level of power, low level of interest, and a poor attitude. But a stakeholder that's closer to the front face of the cube, we would say they've got a positive attitude. Positive attitude. So, for example, you've got a stakeholder who is a raving fan of the project. They've got a high level of power, but they don't have much interest. We'll put them there. High level of power, low level of interest, positive attitude. All the stakeholders that are up front here on the front face, they have positive attitudes. See, this one has a positive attitude, high level of power, or a low level of power, and a low level of interest. So let me go in and highlight that one more time. There are actually 8 categories for these people. So that one right there has a low level of interest, low level of power, but a positive attitude. We put a stakeholder over here. Now they have a high level of interest. See that? Low level of power though. And if we put another stakeholder, we'll use a different color just for the red. Stakeholder we could put here. I'll just make that a contrast. Seems like I will use a black outline. So over here, this top right, but in the front face, you've got a stakeholder that has a high level of power, a high level of interest, and a positive attitude. Get it? So it is important for you to understand how the stakeholder cube builds on what we took a look at on the previous slide. Power and interest, and then add in the third dimension. All right. So quick question, just to kick the tires and make sure that we understood what we talked about just now. Here's your poll. Your stakeholder Jack has been analyzed with a high level of power and a high level of interest. What is the best strategy for him? I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you very much. Let's end the poll. So hold on to that thought. High level of power, high level of interest. Let's take a look. Boom, there's your image. High level of power, high level of interest. See that? So the answer for this has got to be that one. Okay? What is a trick to knowing this? M is diagonal with this M. See, they're across from each other. What about the K's? This K is diagonal from this K. It's obvious that you would keep these folks here informed. So that's easy to distinguish between keep satisfied versus keep informed. And of course, the M, you wouldn't need to manage these folks close because they have a low level of power and a low level of interest. So that's how you can tackle those questions, all right? But that's not the end of identify stakeholders. Identify stakeholders is a very robust process. So let's go back to our definition. The key thing is we are analyzing and documenting relevant information regarding their interest, regarding their involvement, interdependencies, influence and potential impact on project success. So there's one more thing we need to talk about in the PMBOK guide that comes after the discussion of the stakeholder cube. But I also want to show you the relevance of the stakeholder cube. Let's read here on page 513 one more time, stakeholder cube. It says, it provides a model with multiple dimensions that improves the depiction of the stakeholder community. That's all it is. It's a depiction. And that depiction enables the team to discuss and to understand, how do you see that stakeholder? Oh, I see that stakeholder like this. And you get to a common understanding. So it says, stakeholder community as a multidimensional entity and assist with the development of communication strategies. So that's really what it is, to help you with strategies. But we go a step further. There's one more model that we need to talk about. And that model is the salience model. So I show you a very simple view of the salience model here. The salience model is not depicted in the PMBOK guide, but it is mentioned. And it describes classes of stakeholders based on assessments of three things. One, their power, level of authority. Remember the definition of that? Power, level of authority, or the ability to influence the outcomes of the project. Then we have legitimacy, their involvement being appropriate. Have you ever had a stakeholder that should not be anywhere within the four walls of your weekly or daily meetings? That's not a legitimate involvement. But if a stakeholder is legitimately involved, they've got every right to be there, they've got every right to speak up and, impose their will, as we say, they're there legitimately. And last but not least, we have urgency. Urgency, their need for immediate attention, either time constrained or relating to the stakeholder's high stake in the outcome. So you got to be aware of these three things. And when you have a stakeholder that is powerful, has that level of urgency associated with them and is legitimately involved, what you have is a definitive stakeholder. And that's one of the key words I want you to remember. So it says, in rounding up, the salience model is useful for large, complex communities of stakeholders. You see that? Large, complex communities of stakeholders, or where there are complex networks of relationships with the community. It is also useful in determining the relative importance of the identified stakeholders. Now, this model is a lot more robust than what I'm showing. In fact, PMI have a big old white paper with 9 categories of stakeholders in the salience model. There's no need for us to go that far, but I do want you to observe the definitive stakeholders. That term, not in the PMBOK guide, but it's definitely worth knowing. Okay, so it helps you understand the relative importance. But there's one more thing I want you to highlight in your PMBOK guide. It says the salience model is useful for large complex communities. So if you get a question that says you're working with a large complex community of stakeholders, which of the following should you best use to understand them, to understand the network? The answer would be salience model. On the flip side, if you get a question that says you're working on a small project, a simple relationship between the stakeholders needs to be understood, which tool would you use? It would be your power interest grid. So as you go through your PMBOK guide, it's important that you understand what exactly is used, when, and why. One more thing that's spoken about here in this section of the PMBOK guide is a simple concept of directions of influence. So if that is a project manager, the project manager could lead upwards or could have a relationship upwards with senior management, right? That same project manager could have peers. And those peers, of course, could have associations with the project manager, maybe even influence the project manager. We call that sidewards. So this is upwards. We have sidewards with your peers. We have downwards. And this is really more, as the PMBOK guide describes, with the team or specialists, those who are contributing knowledge or skills, right? And that's called directions of influence. You know, my mentor, John Maxwell, he says a true measure of leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Leadership is all about influence. So here we're really talking about influence, the ability to influence up, influence down, influence sidewards. And the last one here is outwards. It says stakeholders, groups, and their representatives outside the project. So we can also have that outward influence. You could think about it like that, coming out towards you from the board like that. And that would be outward. And we're talking here about stakeholders. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff in chapter 13, which could be extremely helpful, extremely useful in working both on agile projects or predictive projects. All right, so we've talked a lot about identify stakeholders. That's just one of the processes. Let's go to our next process. Okay, our next process is planned stakeholder engagement. This is a very simple one. Planned stakeholder engagement is probably the planning process out of all the 24 that is so scantily talked about. It's so scant, it's unbelievable that there's hardly anything about it. So let's go there, planned stakeholder engagement, the output. You'll know exactly what I mean. Let's take a look at page 522. Page 522 has, what, 5 lines about a major plan. It wasn't very well done, in my opinion. But maybe that's because there's something else in it, right? That has already been spoken about. So let's read the definition. It says, planned stakeholder engagement, let's read on the screen, develops approaches to involve project stakeholders, develops approaches to involve project stakeholders based on their needs, expectations, interests, and potential impact on the project. So if you go to page 522 and then you read what exactly you're trying to get from it, you realize it's a stakeholder engagement plan, right? What is in the stakeholder engagement plan? Very, very small information. It says a stakeholder engagement plan is a component of the project management plan that identifies the strategies and actions required to promote productive involvement of stakeholders in decision-making and execution. It can be formal or informal and highly detailed or broadly framed based on the needs of the project and expectations of stakeholders. It says the stakeholder engagement plan may include, but is not limited to, specific strategies or approaches for engaging with individuals or groups of stakeholders. In other words, how are we going to engage with these stakeholders? But you know what is going to help you do that? It is the Stakeholder Engagement Assessment Matrix. I call it the SEAM, SEAM. So what exactly does that look like? Well, you can see this directly above the description of the Stakeholder Engagement Plan. And this is the SEAM, right? For your exam, you need to understand the 5 categories: unaware, resistant, neutral, supportive, and leading, because these categorize stakeholders and their C for current engagement level and D for desired engagement level. In other words, if you have a stakeholder coming onto the project and they're clueless, they're unaware, don't show up for meetings, always have questions about what you just talked about, they're probably unaware. It says on page 521, unaware of the project and potential impacts. What about resistant? The description on page 521, aware of the project and potential impacts, but resistant to any changes that may occur. You know those stakeholders. I'm one of those stakeholders on some projects. Okay, neutral, aware of the project, but neither supportive nor unsupportive. Then we have supportive, aware of the project and potential impacts and supportive of the work and its outcomes. And last but not least, we have leading, aware of the project and potential impacts and actively engaged in ensuring that the project is a success. So my friends, that is the Stakeholder Engagement Assessment Matrix. Let's have a very quick poll. I'll ask you a question, just one question, and here is your poll. I'll give you a minute. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Thank you very much. Let's end the poll. All right, so for this, you really need to be able to interpret the questions. A PMI will not be as kind as I have been in this question. Now, there's one key thing in this question, one key word that spells out the kind of stakeholder Bob is. It says he is directly opposed to the project. What does it say about neutral? It says neutral, aware of the project, but neither unsupportive or supportive. They're just in the middle. That's neutral. So Bob isn't neutral. It says he's directly opposed. And that should be a clue to you. Resistant, aware of the project and potential impacts, but resistant. That's been opposed, right? Opposed to any changes. And then it says these stakeholders will be unsupportive of the work or outcomes of the project. And for that reason, I have a play on words, and it's earns less. But it's not talking about earn as in EARN. Instead, it's a mnemonic to help you remember the categories. Get it? Earn, U-R-N, earns. And then L for less. It's a play on words, but it helps me remember. And honestly, I cannot tell you how many students have said, these categories are important. So know your categories, know your earns less. All right, that's the second process. The next two processes are going to go pretty quick because they're very straightforward. And the next one is manage stakeholder engagement. Manage stakeholder engagement communicates. This is where we communicate and work with stakeholders to meet their needs and expectations. This is where we address issues. This is where we foster appropriate stakeholder engagement involvement. Now, believe it or not, this process, manage stakeholder engagement, no unique output. There's no unique output from this process. However, there is something unique. And I want you to chat into me and tell me what is unique about this process in terms of one of the ITTOs. Only one is a unique thing. Does anyone remember what it is? What is the unique ITTO for managed stakeholder engagement? Going once, going twice. Very good. Awesome, May. Well done. May knows her tool and technique. Ground rules. Awesome, May. So ground rules, we're going to talk about this quite a lot in the weeks to come because ground rules are called out explicitly in the PMP exam content outline. But in this one, the ground rules are not an output. In this one, the ground rules are a tool and technique. And it's very important for you to know these unique tools and techniques. You were just listening before the meeting to Holly, and Holly was saying, know your unique tools and techniques. She's absolutely correct. So let's go to 13.3 and read about these ground rules. The fourth tool and technique mentioned here on page 528, it says, ground rules defined in the team charter set the expected behavior for the team members, as well as other stakeholders with regard to stakeholder engagement. So here they're using it as a tool and technique. But I want you to tell me, where do you get the team charter they are referring to? Because it says ground rules defined in the team charter. Can anyone type in and tell me where are ground rules found in the team charter? In which knowledge area? Where do you find them? Ground rules in the team charter comes from where? That's very correct, Tamika. It comes from the resource management knowledge area. Which process? Tell me, thank you, Jim, for the chat. Tell me which process you get it from. Let's go to 9 point something to find out. 9 point something. All right, thank you very much. Let's go to page 319. Thank you very much for the chats. All right, let's stop the chats and go to the page 319. It says 9.1. Resource management knowledge area, and specifically it's the planned resource management process, and the output is the team charter. It says the team charter is a document that establishes the team values, agreements, and operating guidelines for the team. The team charter may include, but is not limited to, team values, communication guidelines, decision-making criteria, conflict resolution process, meeting guidelines, and team agreements. Now, if you flip the page over, there's a big old paragraph on page 320, which we will not read all the way, but towards the end, it says, the team charter can be reviewed and updated periodically to ensure a continued understanding of the team ground rules. See that? So that's on page 320. The team charter is an output of planned resource management. All right, so thank you very much for those chats. And that's really what we do in this process, manage stakeholder engagement. Our goal is to engage stakeholders, to communicate with them, and to work with them, to engage them. Now, I quite like the definition of 13.3 because it mentions some key things. Let's read page 523, manage stakeholder engagement. It says, managed stakeholder engagement is the process of communicating and working with stakeholders to meet their needs and expectations, address issues, and foster appropriate stakeholder involvement. But what's the key benefit? The key benefit of this process is that it allows a project manager to increase support. That's what I like. I love stakeholder support. How do you get it? By engaging them. You want to increase support. Remember the question about Bob? You want to minimize resistance. So at a minimum, you want your stakeholders to, don't let them be resistant. Neutral would be at at a minimum. But by the time they're unaware and resistant, it's just no good. But if they're neutral, at least they're not being disruptive. They're not being helpful. They're just there. So this says you want to minimize resistance from stakeholders. And this is very similar to when you communicate. However, when you do managed communications, remember last week, we talked about managed communications where you communicate, but it's not with an intent to engage. You could end up engaging them through just basic communication, but not every stakeholder is like that. Some stakeholders, no, they need more than just communication. They need you to work with them. Remember, in the world of Agile, it tells you to collaborate with your customer and to work daily. It's a daily thing. All right. So that's manage stakeholder engagement. Last but not least, we have monitor stakeholder engagement. Monitor stakeholder engagement is monitoring project stakeholder relationships, tailoring strategies for engaging stakeholders through the modification of engagement strategies and plans. So to round this up, there's often the question, Phil, what's the difference between all these four? Manage stakeholder engagement, manage communications, monitor stakeholder engagement, monitor communications. Let's take a quick look. And here you can see manage stakeholder engagement. The key words that I've emphasized here are communicating and working with stakeholders with a major purpose. That's your major purpose, to gain buy-in and support. You're not communicating with them to fulfill what is in the communications management plan. No, no, no. You are communicating quite all right. You're working with them, right? But your goal, what you're really after, is you want that support, right? You want to minimize resistance. You want buy-in. You want to serve them as well, but that's your major purpose. It's different from managed communications, where your major goal, it says, communicating with stakeholders with a purpose to meet in communication requirements in the communication management plan. So if you're in managed communications and your focus is not to fulfill what's in the plan, you're not doing it well. And there's a difference. I might send out a report because it was promised. I might have a particular touch point because it was promised. But when I do managed stakeholder engagement, it is for a different reason. I want the engagement. I don't just want you to say, oh, nice report, nice Gantt chart, nice burn down chart. No, 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 no. I want you to be sucked in. You get what I'm saying? So that's the manage side. And one of the clues, the word manage is often associated with executing. Let's talk about monitor stakeholder engagement. This one, you are monitoring the effectiveness of stakeholder engagement. How well is our stakeholder engagement plan working? In monitor communications, you are monitoring the effectiveness of your communications management plan. All right. So my friends, one more question and we'll be done with the final chapter of the PMBOK guide. A blast from the first process one more time because it's so important. Let's relaunch the poll. I'll give you 30 seconds. All right, thank you for your chats. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, let's end the poll. Let's share the results. Okay. So, my friends, from the results, it seems as though we need a reminder. I will give you a reminder right now. So the reminder is this: MKMK. MK, MK. The M's are diagonal. All right. So now we've done some self-correction, right? Power is on the y-axis. Power goes up or down, remember? So that's why it's on the y-axis. And interest. All right, I'm going to give you one more shot at this question because I want more people to get it right. So let's relaunch the poll. Giving you the reminder, I'll give you 10 seconds to choose the option. Let's nail it this time. M, monitor. The other M, manage close. That K, keep satisfied. And the other K, keep informed. So it says a low level of power and a high level of interest. Low level of power and high level of interest. Seems like it's become worse than better. Low level of power, high level of interest is this one. It's that one. Keep informed. You got to know this stuff for your exam. That's why I gave it to you again. It's not uncommon to have these questions on the test. All right. So let's end the poll and share the results. And I think it's very similar. Okay. I think we had one more person come over to the right side. But I really want you to know this well. So go back, double down. Monitor, keep satisfied, manage close, keep informed. The power is always on the y-axis. The interest is always on the x-axis. All right. And with that, we are done with the final chapter of the PMBOK guide. And we have just a little bit more to do in the area of professional responsibility. This is going to go very quick. So now we are done with chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Now we're going to professional responsibility. All right. For professional responsibility, my friends, if you have not already downloaded it, I want to encourage you to download the PMP or the PMI Code of Ethics. I'm going to send it to you. And professional conduct. It's right there on PMI's site for free. And here is the link. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Here is the link. And here is what it looks like. This is it. PMI Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. See it there? We refer often to this area as professional responsibility, PMP, professional responsibility, but it's really the Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. Before your exam, please read it. Please read it. I remember taking my exam. This was actually the area I scored the highest. I got a 90 in this area. They would give you your marks in those days. And boy, oh boy, when I saw those questions, I knew they were Code of Ethics type questions. And I wished I had read the whole thing a second time. I didn't. So I want to make sure you read it really well. So I'm going to show you the high level. What exactly does this document mean? Go read it yourself. I don't want to bore you. You've already watched the videos on the learning system. Some of you, for professional responsibility, there's no need for us to spend another 10 minutes on it. So I'm going to be very quick. All right. The major thing you need to understand about this is the PMI has a vision of how project managers conduct themselves. So the Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, it describes the expectations that we have of ourselves and fellow practitioners in the global project management community. The very first thing here is responsibility. I'm going to cover this really, really quick. Responsibility is our duty to take ownership for the decisions we make or fail to make, the actions we take or fail to take, and the consequences that result. You might actually have heard this being referred to as be accountable. Same thing. They just use the word responsibility, right? So it's our duty to take ownership. We need to consider our stakeholders' interests when we're making decisions. And we need to take on jobs that are consistent with our qualifications. In other words, no fudging. And we want to fulfill obligations made to stakeholders. So we want to be responsible, all right? That's talked about on page 2 and page 3. On page 3, the PMI say, we bring violations of this code to the attention of the appropriate body for resolution. So PMI has an expectation if you know something's been done wrong, not only on the PMP exam or to the PMI in general, there's an expectation that as a PMP, someone who is associated with a PMI, they want those actions to be above board. All right. And that's why in the beginning, they tell you who this code is for. It's for people applying for an exam, be it a CAPM, a PMP, a PGM, whatever the PMI exam, or people who work in a volunteer capacity, or people who work with the PMI to some degree. All right. So that's responsibility. Let's go to our next one, respect. It says, respect is our duty to show a high regard for ourselves, others, and the resources entrusted to us. So as you see on the screen, show a high level of regard for yourself and others, use resources respectfully, stay informed about the customs of others. You hear the word culture shock. Well, nothing wrong in culture shock, but project manager, be clued up, be clued in. So I once went out to a particular place where frog legs were the order of the day. Silly me, I forgot. I had not done my research and made a comment that was looked at as, you definitely don't know much about us. That's not good. So you want to do your research. You want to stay informed about the customs of others. You also want to ensure that the team that is working with you is informed about the customs of others. Here it says, under respect, it says, we inform ourselves about the norms and customs of others and avoid engaging in behaviors they might consider disrespectful. So remember my story about the frog legs. We listen to others' points of view, seeking to understand them. We approach directly those persons with whom we have a conflict or disagreement. We conduct ourselves in a professional manner, even when it is not reciprocated. All right, let's go to our next one. This is a poll. And this is about code of ethics. So what do you think the code of ethics is? I'll give you a minute to think about it. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's end the poll. And if you had taken the poll online, the videos online, and done the quiz, you would have seen this one. All right, so majority have chosen C. It is the correct answer. Why is the answer not D? The expectation the Project Management Institute has for members of the global project management community? Well, that's one overarching thing, but we like to use the word mutual. The expectations we have for ourselves, it has to be an inside job, right? And then an external one with our fellow practitioners. So the best answer for this is C. You see how these questions are phrased? What good is it if it's what PMI wants, but not what we want or know we should be doing for ourselves? So there's a lot of this psychological type of play on the exam. There's usually two options that sound good, but one is better than the other. All right, let's go to our next one. The next one to talk about here is fairness. Let's read what the PMI say about fairness. It says, fairness is our duty to make decisions and act impartially and objectively. Our conduct must be free from competing self-interest, prejudice, and favoritism. So on the screen, be fair in your dealings. If someone deserves a promotion, let them have the promotion. If someone is privy to having information, let them have the information. Don't withhold it from them. An example is Phil works for a manager named Jill, and Jill loves how Phil is working so much. She doesn't want him to leave the department. So when news about a promotion in the company comes up and she's meant to share it with Phil as part of the career path agreements, she withholds the information because she doesn't want to lose Phil. That is not being fair. For whatever reason, disclose what people need if they're privy to it. Be fair in your dealings, be transparent with stakeholders, be impartial in your actions, and constantly re-examine your decisions. That's fairness. And here we have a question. Here's your poll, relaunched. What do you think? 1 minute. All righty, 5, 4, 3, 2. So just imagine, okay, let's end the poll. Think about it. Just think about it for a second. Honesty is the best policy. What did the PMI say? Transparency. Oh, I can't be part of this. I'm sorry. 5 months later, Phil is a baller in another company. That's why you didn't want to tell us. It doesn't tell well, does it? It doesn't tell well. So the best answer is recuse yourself with reasons. Transparency. Think about the situation here, right? You work for a software giant. Your competitor, right, is bidding on the same project you are. And you've already been for an interview and you have employment with this rival company. You've been asked to spare the process. What would the best thing be? To be transparent. So these are some of the types of questions you can expect. B is a great thing to do. It's morally just. But C is what the PMI would be looking for. You got to be transparent, come clean, be honest. Okay. And that's why some people say, Phil, you can say that all day in the real world. I ain't telling nobody what's going on in my professional life. I recuse myself, period. But in the world of the PMI, the best answer would be C. All right, let's go to another of these questions. Test professional responsibility. Some of you who have taken the learning system, you've already seen this one, but let's go for another ride on it. On the day of completion, a stakeholder asks for a feature you discussed at the start of the project, never mentioning it in the test phase until now. What could have prevented this? What do you think? Give you 30 more seconds. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Let's end the poll. I love how it is just even on this one. Well done. So think about it. A key stakeholder, yes, it's a key stakeholder, right? It's a key stakeholder, but that's not the thing. We're not really after whether it's a key stakeholder. It could be any stakeholder. The question could have read, on the day of completion, a stakeholder. You don't have to be key stakeholder. So I know when it says key stakeholder, we're coming off stakeholder management. So we're thinking the power interest grid. Yeah, you would have been like white on rice with them. That's true. But what if you did get that requirement and you did nothing with it? The answer to this one is actually the requirements traceability matrix, because that would have helped you stay on top of the requirement, because it says discussed at the start of the project, never mentioning it. They didn't have to mention it again. It was your job to track what was in the RTM. Remember what's in the RTM? Let's go on down to 5.2. I want to remind you about the RTM real quick. Requirements traceability matrix. What are some of the things here? It says tracing requirements includes, but it's not limited to, business needs, project objectives, project scope, WBS deliverables, product design, product development, test strategy, high-level requirements, and so on. So it tracks all of these things. And it says attributes associated with each requirement can be recorded in the requirements traceability matrix. Let's read page 148. Requirements traceability matrix is a grid that links product requirements from their origin to the deliverables that satisfies them. The implementation of a requirements traceability matrix helps ensure that each requirement adds business value by doing what? Linking it to the business and project objectives. It provides a means to track requirements throughout the project lifecycle and helping to ensure that the requirements approved in the requirements documentation are delivered at the end of the project. So this would have helped you ensure that it's delivered. But what is one of the things that you are tracking here? The person or persons who asked for that requirement. We call that the origin, the source, right? And it says, typical attributes used in the requirements traceability matrix is on page 149. May include a unique identifier, a textual description of the requirement. You see, that should have been captured. The rationale for inclusion, owner, see that? The person, the source. Where did it come from? All right, so I know these questions make you go, but well, this is how PMI thinks. But when you see a question, you want the best, the thing that will help you move that situation forward, solve the problem. All right, we got one more to talk about, and that's honesty. Honesty, we want to provide accurate, reliable information in a timely manner. We want to have the courage to share unfavorable news as soon as possible. And we do not want to hide the truth, though the outcomes are negative. Okay, and that's the final one. And of course, one more poll, which you probably have already answered. So the answer to this, we've already talked about recuse yourself with reasons. Okay, same question. All right, now before we round up, I want to talk really quickly about data flows. So we've talked about chapters 1 to 13. We've talked about professional responsibility. I know some of you haven't read that, so or watched the videos. Make sure you do. But I want to talk about data flows very, very quick. And there's one data flow that I really want to hone in on. The first one is, or I should say, the most important one I want to focus on first is understanding WPD, WPI, WPR. Why? Because people say it comes out in different ways on the exam. So you got to know your WPD, WPI, WPR. All right, let's go for it one more time. I want to talk about it one more time. So it starts off with direct and managed project work, right? You got to remember direct and managed project work. Excuse me, it's jumping all over the place. Direct and managed project work gives you work performance data. You got to remember that. It has to be hardwired. You got to know where WPD comes from. It's so important. WPD goes to all processes in monitoring and controlling that are outside of integration. So this is all that's in monitoring and controlling outside of integration. So from scope down, everything in monitoring and controlling, this is where WPD goes, right? What is WPD? Work performance data is a raw observation. You're going to analyze it in all of these processes from a scope perspective, a schedule perspective, and so on. And then you get your WPI, the analyzed work performance data that goes into monitor and control project work only. And from monitor and control project work, you get all that work performance information, you filter it, you whittle it down, you put it into a work performance report, and then you use those work performance reports to perform integrated change control. So if you're going to make a change, guess what you need? Sometimes you need a work performance report to see if it makes sense to work that change request. Sometimes as a result of the performance of the project, you're not going to work a change request. The next one is manage team. We use the work performance reports to see how well the team is performing. The next one is manage communications. This is where we actually distribute these work performance reports. This is where we actually send them out to stakeholders. And last but not least, we have monitor risks, because risk cuts across all of these areas, of course. And you can see monitor risk is here as well. There's a feedback loop, right? And in monitor risk, we want to make sure that we are monitoring the entire project, and the work performance report helps us do that. All right. So that's one of the data flows that I wanted to point out. The last one that I'll point out for today is the change request sequence. Somebody asks you for a change. What do you do? Well, if they ask it verbally, in the world of predictive, we want to put it in formal writing. If someone wants a change to, let's say in the world of Agile, it's done differently. Just remember that. In the world of Agile or Scrum, you got to get the product owner involved. You can't just do whatever you like. But anybody can ask for a change, and it's managed very differently. But in this world of predictive, we want to keep track of it, put it in formal writing. And then we want to log it into changelog. We want to analyze it with a team. And then the project manager sends it on to the change control board. They analyze it, step 6. Step 7, they decide the outcome. Step 8, a change control board member or a project manager documents the outcome. It's very structured. That's why predictive is very much by the book and by the process. It's not like Agile, but it's for different reasons. And it works for many companies. It's okay. Number 9, the change log is shared with stakeholders so they know the outcome. And step 10, you carry out the change request. Just a couple more things here on this screen before we go to questions. Step 6 here, change control board might decide to ask for more information. They might decide to negotiate with a requester. And also there could be a step where you bring in the sponsor or the customer if they are not in the change control board. We also have a feedback loop. If they're already in the change control board, then there might just be a negotiation for more information, different terms, but ultimately you got to feed all of these back up there and make your final decision. Your final decision is going to be either approved, rejected, on hold, or pending. And that concludes our review of stakeholder management, professional responsibility, and these data flows. Okay, as the weeks go on, we will be doing a lot more data flow exploration. So next week, we're going to be exploring data flows across all the knowledge areas. All right. Thank you very much. I will end the recording and I will answer any questions you may have. Thank you and have a good rest of your day.